20,000 people, different countries, different ages, different languages, no shared teacher, no shared book, no shared trend that explains it. And yet they keep reporting the same sequence. 3 dreams, in the same order. Not similar, not close. The same place, the same geometry, the same details. If this is just a viral myth, explain 3 things at once. First, why do strangers draw the same interior layout, right down to the same wrong asymmetries? Second, why does it arrive as a sequence, cathedral, chamber, eraser, like stages in a machine? Third, why do the few waking world clues people mention, old map words, symbols, lost region references, keep clustering around the same old world timeline, right where the modern story begins? Any one point can be dismissed. All 3 together behave like a pattern. And patterns are what investigators follow. They call the first scene the Amber Cathedral. Not because it looks like fantasy, because it feels like infrastructure. People describe a massive hall with warm light trapped inside the stone, like the room itself is on. Columns look mineral, amber, resin, honeyed glass, but the surface always feels heavy and cold, engineered, not magical. Then the dangerous shift happens. Your brain stops treating it as a dream narrative. It starts treating it like a place. So the question changes from, what did you see? To, what did it do? Because in these reports, the cathedral behaves like a container, like it holds a stable condition. Light, air, temperature. People step inside and notice the same things. The outside world feels loud, and inside, everything feels controlled. A low vibration you can't quite place. Air that feels dry and clean, like it's been filtered. Light with no single source, as if the walls are storing it. Not movie effects. Environmental function. And that's why sketches mattered more than stories. In the first wave, people didn't write law. They posted layouts. Hand-drawn plans with spacing, angles, and rough measurements, like someone trying to rebuild a floor plan they once walked through. Strangers converged on the same structure, a central aisle, repeating bays, a consistent column grid, even the same odd offsets you would only repeat if you were copying the same mental image. Some drew a raised threshold where the air changes. Some marked a side corridor that feels off, like it bends the sound. Some insisted on a balcony line that shouldn't be there, and then another person, continents away, drew the same balcony. Now look at me for a second. This is the entire game. When a story is invented, details drift. When a story is shared, details converge. And convergence is measurable. So stay with me, because the cathedral is only stage 1. Stage 2 arrives next, almost always. A circular room, smooth walls, a hum you feel in your teeth. They call it the resonance chamber. And if your first reaction is sci-fi, hold that thought, because the details people give are not cinematic. They're physical. A ring groove in the floor that catches dust into patterns. A raised platform that feels like a diaphragm. A sound that isn't loud, but dense, like pressure you can lean on. Teeth vibrating, ear pressure changing. Nausea that clears the moment the hum stabilizes. Those are body-level descriptions, hard to fake at scale because they aren't dramatic. They're specific. Then the community did something you don't usually see in paranormal stories. They tried to reproduce one detail in the waking world, the dust patterns. In the chamber reports, there's always a moment where fine powder gathers into lines, loops, and radial shapes near the ring groove. People describe it without knowing the term, but engineers recognize the behavior immediately. Cymatics, Chladni patterns, the same phenomenon you get when you vibrate a plate at specific frequencies and sand arranges itself into geometry. So people ran crude tests, not lab grade. Not perfect, a metal tray, fine salt, a cheap speaker, a tone generator app, a dark room, and they started seeing it. Not the exact same pattern every time, because that depends on material and frequency, but the behavior, the sudden organization, the spokes, the node, the ring where the grains refuse to cross. And that's where some skeptics in the thread went quiet, because multiple people reported that the pattern they produced looked like the most common shapes described in the dream. Radial symmetry, a central still point, a ring boundary. If you want a sober interpretation, you can have one. Maybe the brain is borrowing a real phenomenon and building a dream around it. But the moment you grant that, the dream stops being magic. It becomes a memory built out of physics. Resonance isn't fantasy. Resonance is why bridges can fail when marching steps match their natural frequency. Resonance is why glass can shatter when tone hits the right range. Resonance is why builders cared about volt geometry, ratios, and material density long before modern textbooks made those ideas fashionable again. If you wanted to move energy through a structure without obvious wires, if you wanted a system that uses the building itself, resonance is one of the few concepts that stays on the table. I'm not saying you can power a city with a humming room. I'm saying the dream aligns with a plausible category, a built space designed to tune an environment, airflow, vibration, pressure, maybe even electric potential, using geometry and materials. And there's a reason cathedrals keep showing up in old world research beyond simple grandness. They're the only mainstream buildings where geometry, material, and airflow are treated like they matter. Vaults aren't just pretty ceilings. They distribute load, they shape air, and they shape sound. If you stand under a true dome and clap once, you can feel the room answer back. Not as echo, but as behavior. Some spaces amplify a note, some swallow it, some make your chest feel different. That's not spirituality, that's acoustics. So when a dream keeps returning to a hall that feels like infrastructure and then takes you into a chamber that behaves like a tuning device, you don't have to become mystical, you can become suspicious. Because functional spaces leave functional fingerprints. People don't describe lasers or glowing buttons. They don't talk like storytellers trying to impress you. They talk like bodies reacting to a machine, like the room is searching for a stable tone, and when it finds it, everything locks. Pressure equalizes, the nausea clears, the hum becomes smooth instead of rough, and the dust doesn't just shake, it sorts itself, as if invisible walls appear on the floor and the grains obey them. That kind of detail is why the chamber matters. It doesn't ask you to believe in spirits. It asks you to account for consistent mechanics. And then comes the third dream, the one people hesitate to describe because writing it down feels like inviting it back. They call it the eraser. In that dream, the architecture doesn't collapse. It unbuilds. A wave passes through the structure, not fire, not an explosion, not random chaos, a pressure change, a frequency shift, something that turns solid into loose. Edges blur, carved detail crumbles, columns lose definition. Stone becomes powder, like dry clay turned to dust. Demolition without rubble. Deletion. And the reports agree on the most unsettling point. It doesn't feel accidental. It feels targeted. Like a system doing what it was designed to do, resetting the environment back to blank. Then, months after the first waves of sketches, something changes. A fourth experience begins appearing. And this is where the story stops being 3 repeating scenes and becomes a timeline. Because the fourth isn't a location. It's a message. People wake up with one clear thought. You're remembering it too late. Not, I had a nightmare. Too late, like a door that only stays open for a short window. And now, it's closing. So how did this escalate from a weird internet thread to something that feels like a case file? One woman, she used the name Sarah online, started collecting reports like evidence. Not to prove Tartaria, not to win a debate. She did what any serious mind does when it sees repetition. She catalogued it. Dates, countries, ages, whether the person could draw, whether they had visited major cathedrals in real life, whether they had any interest in old world research before the dreams began. That last one mattered, because the easiest explanation is suggestion. But a large chunk of people had no Tartaria background at all. Some had never heard the word. They weren't watching the same channels, reading the same books, or following the same accounts. They were nurses, mechanics, students, military, teachers, people who stumbled into a thread and felt their stomach drop because someone described a place they recognized. Sarah changed the entire tone by asking one question. Describe the building. Not what you think it means. Not how it made you feel. The building. She forced everyone into the same format. Shape, materials, light, the feel of the floor, where the hum came from, the number of columns across the aisle, the spacing between them, the location of the ring. No interpretations, just sensory data. And the sensory data still matched. Then something else happened. Something that turns mystery into direction. Someone posted an old photograph. Not a perfect match. Not a smoking gun. Just uncomfortable. A late 1800s interior shot of a massive hall. Columns. Arches. A strange central structure that looks less like a church feature and more like a base for equipment. People in the thread began circling the same elements in red. This is the aisle. This is the ring. This is the platform. And that's where the Tartaria connection stopped being a label and became a path. Because Tartaria in this niche isn't only a region name on old maps, it's shorthand for a bigger claim that an older infrastructure existed, that it used principles we don't openly use now, and that the 19th century wasn't only progress, it was replacement. Now the internet loves to leap from a feeling to a conclusion. So here's the grounded version. If an older system existed, call it Tartaria, call it the old world, call it a lost layer, what would it leave behind? Architecture that seems overbuilt, standardized forms repeating across continents, devices miscategorized as ornaments, functions that later generations couldn't operate, so they renamed those functions as aesthetics. That's what makes the Amber Cathedral descriptions so interesting. In the reports, it doesn't behave like a religious hall. It behaves like a chamber built around a process. People describe the warm light not as candles or windows, but as a steady ambient glow, like a room that's always on. They describe air that feels dry, stable, controlled. They describe the hum as something you feel before you hear. And then the chamber tightens the idea into one word: tuning. So what would evidence even look like in a case like this? Not one photo, not one map, repetition. If we find multiple real locations whose interior geometry matches the sketch features, ring grooves, platform layout, column spacing, then the conversation changes. Not to it's proven, but to the pattern has a target. And there are candidates: old halls, cathedrals, underground chambers, vaulted spaces built with weirdly consistent ratios. In mainstream explanations, those ratios are aesthetics. In engineering, ratios are function. And when devices become unoperable, they get repurposed. This is the difference between fantasy and hidden history thinking. Fantasy says, a secret civilization built magic. Hidden history thinking says, a functional system existed, then got disabled, then got relabeled. So let's talk about the reset the dreams keep pointing at. In Tartaria content, the reset is often treated as one giant catastrophe: mudflood, war, fire, a single event that breaks the timeline. In this story, the reset behaves like a process. Phase 1, the system exists. Phase 2, the system is neutralized. Phase 3, the labels change. Phase 4, the new story becomes the only story. Phase 5, the leak appears through people, through dreams, through repetition. That leak is what we're looking at. Here's the detail that keeps the geography from becoming pure vibe. In the reports, 3 things repeat, even when the person has no Tartaria vocabulary at all. First, the material. People keep calling it amber, or the closest word in their language, because nothing else fits the look. Warm, honeyed, translucent, but solid. Second, the sequence. Cathedral first, chamber second, eraser third, like a protocol. Third, the pull. A direction that isn't a compass point so much as a region memory, across the steppe, beyond the mountains, north of the old routes. When Sarah mapped those descriptions without labels, the cluster didn't land on Paris or Rome or London. It leaned east. It leaned into the same band, older Western maps, casually painted with one lazy word: Tartari. Let me step in here. This is where people either roll their eyes or they finally understand why the dream reports kept refusing to drift. Now, I can already hear the counter-argument. Of course it points there. You're in the Tartaria niche. But remember, many people weren't Tartaria viewers first. They encountered the label after they had the matching memory. A fandom starts with a label and hunts for confirmation. A case starts with a repeated detail and then searches for the best-fitting label. This started with geometry, not ideology. And once Sarah pinned enough reports together, a geographic silhouette formed, a pull toward a zone many couldn't name, but described as across the steppe, north of the old routes, beyond the mountains, Central Asia, Siberian edges. The band of territory older Western maps casually labeled Tartary. So, what do we do with a pattern like this? We do what the thread accidentally did right. We stop debating belief and start logging specifics. Because when a story is fake, details drift. When a story is shared, details converge. And convergence is measurable. Number of columns, spacing between bays, where the balcony breaks, where the side corridor shifts, where the air changes, where the groove sits in the chamber, where the still ring appears in the dust, where the eraser begins, at the edges or at the node. These aren't poetic questions, they're engineering questions. And once you see it as engineering, a sharper question appears, one that holds retention because it keeps getting worse. If a reset is a process, who benefits from making it look like chaos? Because chaos is how you erase accountability, but process leaves fingerprints, standard phrases in paperwork, institutional labels that arrive everywhere at once, new map names that overwrite old ones, a sudden confidence across countries about what the past was supposed to be. This is why the eraser dream lands so hard. It isn't just destruction, it's deletion plus replacement. The feeling people describe isn't only fear, it's recognition, like watching a familiar layer being scrubbed away while you're still standing on it. So if you've ever looked at an old world building and felt that low-grade dissonance, too precise, too massive, too infrastructure, to be explained by the simple story you were given, this is where that feeling belongs. Not as proof, as a clue. Because the cathedral doesn't behave like a church, it behaves like a regulated environment. The chamber doesn't behave like a ritual room. It behaves like a tuning device. The eraser doesn't behave like a disaster. It behaves like a tool. And the message, too late, doesn't behave like a nightmare. It behaves like a timing warning. Here's a possibility the community hates because it's both mundane and terrifying. Maybe the leak isn't mystical. Maybe it's maintenance. When a sealed system starts failing, pressure finds cracks, not always in concrete, in people, in memory, in dreams. So the Amber Cathedral might not be a fantasy temple. It might be the image your brain uses when it bumps into a suppressed layer, a stable room, a controlled atmosphere, a repeating geometry that refuses to blur like normal dreams do. The resonance chamber might not be a sci-fi device. It might be a remembered mechanism, one you can't name in waking life, but your nervous system can still recognize as vibration, pressure, pattern. And the eraser might not be a horror scene. It might be the remembered signature of removal, how you neutralize a structure without leaving the kind of rubble that invites questions. If that sounds too big, good. Big claims should feel heavy. But remember, we aren't starting from a claim. We're starting from a repeat. So hold two ideas at once. 1. Dreams can lie. 2. Patterns are harder to fake than people think. If the pattern collapses under scrutiny, we learn something about how stories spread. If the pattern holds, we learn something far worse, that a deleted layer of history still has ways to echo. And if you're wondering what the Amber Cathedral really is, don't chase the name, chase the function. Because the moment you do, the whole Tartaria question stops being a meme and starts sounding like an engineering problem we inherited without consent. And that, more than anything, is why so many people wake up shaken, not because they saw something spooky, because they saw something organized, something that was built, something that worked, and something that, in the third dream, gets erased on purpose. If you're waiting for one perfect smoking gun, you're thinking in headlines. Systems don't leave headlines. They leave standards, ratios, repeated parts, and the quiet confidence of a rewritten label. That's why the dreams don't hand you a name. They hand you a workflow. Observe, compare, measure, and keep the pattern intact. Once it looks like a system, the only question is, what replaced it? And why now? And this is why your visuals matter as much as the narration. When we show a vaulted hall, don't just admire it. Look for repeating choices that feel like specification, not decoration. When we show a ring in the floor, ask whether it's wear or design. When we show a platform, ask what it would support. When we show dust and powder, remember what the chamber does in the dream and how quickly real vibration can turn randomness into geometry. Most importantly, don't let the discussion collapse into one screenshot and one victory lap. A real case is built on boring repetition, the same feature appearing in different places, the same phrase in different documents, the same impossible detail surviving in different mouths. So keep watching for the fingerprints of process, where the story gets too precise to be pure myth, where the language stays the same across mouths, where the geometry refuses to drift, where the reset looks less like chaos and more like someone pulling a lever. Because if that lever existed once, it can exist again. And if this leak is real, it won't stop with dreams. It will surface wherever systems fail, in archives, in maps, in buildings that don't match the story. in the small, stubborn details that refuse to disappear, no matter how many times someone tries to overwrite the past. That's the reason the community keeps coming back to the same place, in sleep. Not because it's beautiful, because it's a node, and nodes are where networks remember, even after. If you want the next chapter, subscribe now. Leave your best clue below. What felt off? I'll see you in the next file. Until then, stay alert right now.